On this edition of Independent Sources, redrawing the lines, why so many communities and city council members are unhappy about the new district lines being drafted.
For colored boys, giving voice to gay men of color who have attempted or considered suicide.
And East Willie B, a web series that tries to find humor in the divisive issue of gentrification in one Brooklyn neighborhood. Welcome to the 5th season premiere of Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. The first draft of the new City Council district maps was released just last week, and already critics are complaining that the redrawn lines do not adequately reflect shift in the city's population.
These lines are redrawn every 10 years after the census. They're meant to reflect the growing populations and shifting political power in the city. Hence, the concern from many minority leaders that their communities are not adequately being represented.
More than that is the fear, among others, that not enough people are aware or even care about this issue. I spoke with Lucia Gómez-Jiménez of the community activist organization La Fuente about the redistricting conundrum. Lucia, every 10 years it seems like we are here discussing the problems with redistricting. Why?
Well, the reality is that it's one of those areas of expertise that not too many people have. And then in terms of sustaining that expertise within certain neighborhoods that are being impacted, even gets more difficult. So the realities are that aside from not having, let's say, there's only a certain small number of people who understand the process, who understand the impact, there's an even smaller number of people who are looking out for the best interests of the community versus the best interests of those individuals that are going to benefit, whether it's a city council person, whether it's a state senator, a legislator at a certain level.
So you have a large turnover and people working in this area. How come we're not using the local media, the media at large, to educate people in the same way we've done a good job, we meaning, the government, has done a good job with the census. I mean, there's a large outreach regarding the census, but then the result of the census, which is essentially redistricting, the expertise is no longer there.
Well, there's only a small number of a small number of organizations that work on census and then immediately after understand and are working throughout census to explain to individuals why the census is so important. The aftermath of the census is the redrawing of political lines that in fact is the redrawing of money and resources into your neighborhoods and political power. The reality is that the census is something that's done nationally all at the same time. April 1st, wherever you are, you get counted. It is a federal process, something that is mandated in the U.S. Constitution. The redistricting process is different in every single area, in every single state, in every single city, and in many counties, redistricting gets done as well throughout the state of New York. And so it's very different to get a message across that is unilateral throughout everyone. But it does get done, and many institutions do census and do redistricting at the same time, but not that many.
In the city, how is it done? In this, statewide or city, next year, 2013, big mayoral race. How is it being done?
Well, there's 51 city council districts in the city of New York. We already went through the state Senate, state assembly, and congressional lines during the beginning of this year and starting off in the middle of last year. This year, in 2012, we're drawing district lines that will have an impact on the electoral districts next year, meaning people will see those districts in effect in 2013 when city council elections run. It's
kind of confusing because when we were talking about doing the story, and my first reaction was like yours, well, we did this before. Well, this is different. And so what's the message now to the same people about the city council redistricting?
I think the message is always one that was both in the state Senate and Assembly as there is now in the city council, which is make sure you understand where you live, where your lines are being drawn, and how as a collective voice in your neighborhood you're able to influence the power that will come as a result of the election. So you need to pay attention as to where the lines are being drawn. I was just in a meeting this morning where people noticed that a line is being drawn 3 ways in High Bridge in the Bronx. I mean, very distinctly, people recognize the exact streets. Wait a minute, that's right across the street is such and such, and that's not different from the neighborhood that I live in. And therefore, we need it in our neighborhoods because we use the school that's across the street, or our tenants association is in that district. And if you pull it away from that particular council person that's done an amazing job at protecting us, then what's going to happen? And the reality is that there's a major difference this time around than there was 10 years ago. We have term limits. And so that in and of itself, we have about 25 seats that are turning over as a result of term limits right now. Obviously, every single district is always up to grab. People can always run in any district, but 25 that are going to be open. And that leaves a different way that you can draw districts in order not to just protect incumbents, but not even to take those incumbents' home addresses or their locations as a top priority, or even as a method for drawing.
If I'm an average New Yorker, I need to find out what's happening in my district. Where do you go get information? How do you get informed and educated?
Unlike the state senate and assembly, which I thought was a slightly more closed, I'm hoping the city council won't be as closed as that process
Meaning
was.
as closed?
In terms of not being able to get the information out to the population as much as, you know, we had limited amounts of information that was being, that the media had in terms of state senate and assembly. Unless you were like a blogger or really political insider, there wasn't a lot of information that you've presumed people would be knowledgeable of and they could have access to. At the city council level, they're trying to really make it more open. They're making the process, and you can go to nyc.gov/districting, and you can get the transcripts of the hearings, similar to what they did at the state senate level. But at the same time, apparently you can now learn how to draw your own districts, and you can be there and design your own district with the web-based fashion. Reality is that it's also a complex issue, right? Some people are like, oh, I don't like politics. Well, this is not just about politics, right? This is how your neighborhood looks within the eyes of the electoral process, and how it looks on the eyes of the city council person being elected, and what issues they choose to address and which ones they choose to ignore.
What's your organization and others are doing really to educate and to really keeping the powers that be honest about on this issue?
Well, at La Fuente, we're actually trying to get out there more and talk to our communities, our neighborhoods, and we've done community meetings. Every month we hold meetings with our members where we actually inform them, look, this process is coming up now, the hearings are in such and such a day. We're actually planning forums. We just held a recent event with the National Institute for Latino Policy, Angelo Falcón, that came out with that report on Latinos and redistricting, and the reality is that we wanted the Latino community to understand intensely. They're one of the one of those covered minorities that they talk about, Black, Latino, and Asians, that are covered under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, that really requires our communities to be engaged, participate. Growing number of new immigrants are Latino. What
was the finding, the conclusion of this report, Latinos in City Council redistricting? I looked it over. Apparently, the Latino political participation is almost on par with the percentage of Latinos in the city, like 23 to 28%.
And what you're talking about is the reflection of the city council members as a result, as a reflection of the total population. And this report actually just highlights the process. It highlights trouble areas where Latinos are in high concentration. Let's be realistic. The entire city is segregated and based in terms of neighborhoods, and some neighborhoods like in Queens or in the Lower East Side and Chinatown, or in areas in the Bronx, that you see a mixture of population. But for the most part, we are a very highly segregated city. And in the areas where Latinos are of high concentration in certain neighborhoods, Angelo had an ability to point out those areas, you know, the same way that they're doing now with districting, and being able to identify areas that we needed to pay attention to. Areas like in Sunset Park, in District 38.
Pay attention to them regarding what?
Paying attention to the way in which the lines are drawn and whether or not that would fragment those communities. The reality is at the level, I will listen to 10 people yelling at me than listening to 3 people yelling at me. Not because the ideal council person says, well, I listen to everyone, sure. But in 365 days that you have a year, you need to pick your battles. And if these 10 people are gonna get you a hell of a lot bad press, then these 3 people who don't get listened to as much because they're not as loud, that's what we call a population of 10 that are able to have a stronger impact on a particular election cycle or an elected official, and 3 that perhaps were fragmented. There's 3 here, 3 here, and 3 here, and together they would be 9. and they would have a similar competitive voice to these 10. But if they're fragmented in 3 different locations, dividing and conquer. And it is exactly what we tell our communities to look out for. Don't be divided, because at the end of the day, if you're divided, you could very well be fragmented in such a way you have no political power. Or you could be so saturated, oh, let's just put all those troublemakers in one district. Shut them up. Now we have 50 real districts we work with and only 1 that is a trouble district. So there's other ways, right? So you can be fragmented or you can be jam-packed in an area. And those are some of the similar issues that we're looking at in many.
And that's across the city. It's not just with the Latino community.
That's right. I mean, one of the areas that La Fuente works with in particular is taking a look at new immigrant communities. Let's be realistic. This is not a process that's for now. This is for 10 entire years before the next census and before the next districting cycle kicks in. So we're talking about living with these districts for the next 10 years. Wow, that's about 3 city council cycles of elections, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what you're going to see is that if you're divided now, imagine what the growth is in many of these areas that we've been tracking population demographics. There's going to be more division going forward. And so these communities will not have the ability to really compound their power and their strength to really have a direct say on that elected official or the issues that are at hand.
Lucia, thank you very much for a spirited discussion about redistricting.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
When we come back, addressing the issue of suicide among gay men of color.
Before that, Abby Ishola has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. From El Diario La Prensa, daycare centers in New York are preparing to fight Mayor Bloomberg's budget cuts for the 2012-2013 school year. Beginning October 1st, daycare centers and preschools subsidized by the city will have to pay for their employees' health insurance. The city plans to reimburse facilities with a little more than $40 for each child they have, but only if the child isn't absent more than 10 days. Leaders at daycare centers throughout the city say the compensation isn't enough to help cover necessary expenses and employee health benefits. They are fighting to get the city to increase the proposed reimbursement for each child in order to comply with the new rule. Korean Times reports that many Korean matchmaking agencies are luring people into considering illegal marriages for immigration purposes. These agencies have been running fake ads in magazines, posing as matchmakers, looking for clients that are U.S. citizens and are of specific age groups. Korean Americans who've answered the advertisements have been offered up to $20,000 to marry an immigrant. Many Indian immigrants are in conflict with their children over dating and relationship choices. Little India spoke to several young Indians living in South Africa, Mauritius, and California who say dating in liberal societies is difficult for them because their parents still hold on to old Indian traditions. Older Indians in the diaspora feel dating in general and dating non-Indians is against their cultural ideals. Yet many are oblivious to the fact that the rules for dating back in India are becoming more flexible and westernized. And finally, from the forward, Mr. Softy Who, children in Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods rather keep an eye out for the kosher La Meridian Basel ice cream truck. Univ Basel has been selling kosher ice cream out of a pink minibus in Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods like Williamsburg and Crown Heights for the past 7 years. Instead of using traditional ice cream truck music, Basel came up with a clever jingle that invites customers to buy ice cream and make a bracha, or a blessing. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora.
Thanks, Abby. For colored boys who have considered suicide when the rainbow is still not enough is a new anthology that examines the issue of suicide among gay men of color. The book borrows its title from the famous choral poem by Ntozake Shange for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough.
I sat down with the book's editor, Keith Boykin, and a contributing editor, Clay Kane, to talk about the timing of the book and the prevalence of suicide among minority gay men. Clay, give us a sense of how prevalent suicide is among gay men of color.
Well, I think you've really seen that last year. I mean, there was a rash of LGBT teen suicides, not even of color, just in general. And I mean, I don't have the exact stats for you, but I think it's obvious with homophobia, with sexism, with racism, that I think a lot of LGBT youth, especially of color, they feel isolated. They feel lonely. They don't feel like they have a voice. And that's why For Colored Boys is such an important book, because I think that it gives voice to the voiceless. It brings a face to faceless stories. I mean, and there's talks of suicide in the book, folks who have considered suicide, and thankfully they didn't go that route. But the numbers are sometimes invisible. The numbers aren't always there, but it's happening, and it's important that we talk about it.
Clay said that we've seen last year a number of suicides among gay men of color, though I read in the introduction to your book that you take issue with the coverage of the media of suicides amongst black gay men.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times it isn't covered. I mean, a lot of people heard about the suicide, the tragic death of Tyler Clementi, the young Rutgers University student who jumped off of the George Washington Bridge in 2011, I believe it was, 2010. But there wasn't a great deal of reporting about other suicides that happened around that same time. A young boy, Carl Joseph Walker Hoover, an 11-year-old boy in Massachusetts who was a week shy of his 12th birthday, who hanged himself because he was subjected to anti-gay bullying, a black young boy. There's a Latino boy in Atlanta, Georgia, Jaheim Herrera, who was around the same age, who also killed himself because of anti-gay bullying. There are cases throughout the media that really didn't get a lot of attention, and I felt that it was important to try to draw attention to some of these. You know, the last statistic I did see was that something in the neighborhood of 43% of black gay men have attempted or considered suicide. That's an astounding number for a community that's subjected to so many different issues.
Why did you choose to inspire from the title of the 1974 book?
Well, you know, at the same time when Tyler Clementi killed himself and these other cases were being reported, Tyler Perry's version of the For Colored Girls book was released as a film. And at that time it occurred to me this was a perfect title for what was really going on in the African American LGBT community. These were literally colored boys who were considering suicide because the rainbow was not enough. And that was almost an identical version of the title that she had used for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow was still enough. So I think it's important to sort of draw those parallels and learn from our history. And I thought the title fit appropriately, giving credit to Ntozake Shange for creating a theme that is still relevant and powerful even today.
Now, the book focuses on men, how their experiences differ of that of women, gay women of color.
Well, I mean, of course, you know, being a man, you do have male privilege. I mean, you can't negate that, whether you're straight or gay. I think there are specifics when it comes to what gay men experience and gay women experience. But I think at the heart of it, you have that duality of blackness and gayness, that duality of being black or being Latino, and also being gay or being lesbian. So there still is a common ground there. And although we don't have, you know, biological women, so to speak, in the book, we do have folks who are androgynous, who play with gender, like B. Scott, of course, who's a big internet sensation. We have Jessica Wilde from RuPaul's Drag Race telling their story. So we do play with gender in the book, and it's not just a rigid, you know, male story.
And Keith, why is the rainbow not enough?
Well, the rainbow is a term that's traditionally used to refer to the LGBT community. And the rainbow flag has often been used as a symbol of the LGBT community. And the idea that the rainbow is not enough is to suggest that this promise of inclusion and community is obviously not enough to keep these young boys from taking their own lives. This idea that we're able to affirm ourselves and affirm a community hasn't yet translated apparently to young kids who still aren't affirmed. And what can we do? You know, Dan Savage, the author, created this whole It Gets Better campaign. But for a lot of men of color and boys of color, it doesn't necessarily get better. And so one of the writers in the book came up with a new idea. Instead of It Gets Better, maybe we should create the theme Make It Better. So we take responsibility and ownership for what we can do, not just to tell everybody, oh, things will get better in the future, but this is what we're going to do today to make things better for you today.
You know, in reference to the rainbow, I think it's important to point out that we're seeing a shift with the LGBT community. Like Frank Ocean, the amazing, you know, R&B artist, he came out, but he didn't use the word gay. All he did was talk about loving another person. And I think for a lot of us, when it comes to our sexual orientation, it really is above the groin. You know, a lot of folks think it's all about sex, but I know for me, the first time I realized that I was gay wasn't when I first had sex, it was when I first fell in love, when I first waited all night for that phone call, when I had my first date. Those kind of intimate feelings, that's really what being gay is about. It is not about the sex necessarily. And a lot of young people, they're not really identifying with the label so much. They're saying, you know what, I'm a person who likes the same sex, but I'm not going to call myself gay. I don't have to have a big coming out party. Times have changed, and this book reflects how much times have changed and our stories have changed.
I want to focus more on the book, and I want to ask you, Keith, would you say that the book represents the new voices of the LGBT community?
New voices. What do you think? I think so. I think there's a lot of new voices in here. I mean, there are some familiar names in the community as well, but there are people here who a lot of people have never heard of before, and people who have voices in their own communities. Clay mentioned a few names already, Jessica Wilde, B. Scott. Those are some new voices in the community already, but there are also some old voices, meaning older people who have been established. James O. Hardy, for example, who is a best-selling author, who has a piece in this book. And there's some people who are brand new, fresh faces, people like Jamal Brown and David Bridgeforth, who are 20-year-olds, who are basically contributing something for the first time to a book and telling their stories and sharing their voices in a way that I think is powerful and will connect with college students and young people in a whole new context than perhaps a 30-year-old or 40-year-old could.
Clay, you've helped in selecting the stories. Tell us more about that process of picking up the most poignant essays.
Well, it was a big process. I mean, we had so many submissions. There were so many things to go through. I mean, we kind of did it on a rating scale, if you will, a grading scale, to really find out what is the best and what's the most amazing stories. And I mean, I read so many impactful, just powerful stories. One called The Test by Charles Stevens. One of the best stories I've ever read on HIV/AIDS. You know, when you think of HIV/AIDS, you're thinking of, you know, these stories of gay men in New York and San Francisco. He really reinvented that story. And there were so many great fiction stories that we got, but this is all nonfiction. They're all basically essays and poems. So it was a big process, but again, it just let me know how diverse our stories are. And I mean, as I was saying before, there's one story by Mark Corrice. The word gay isn't even mentioned. It's called My Night with the Sun, and it really is about intimacy. So it just lets us know that our stories are so diverse. They're not this little monolith of the down low man, you know, kind of, you know, folks about being afraid of black male sexuality. It's really beyond that. So it was a big process, but I learned a lot, and I read so many great stories.
And Keith, how do you go about promoting the book within the community?
Just like this, by going out and sharing the word about the book, and going on TV, radio, newspapers, letting people know about it, using social media a lot, Facebook and Twitter. We have a website we've created for coloredboys.com. It's the number 4, coloredboys.com. And I think it's been pretty effective. We've been out on tour. Clay and I have been to Philadelphia and New York together doing some book signing events. And I've also been to Atlanta and to Boston recently. We think we're both headed to DC soon, and we've got San Francisco and some other places in the mix this month as well. So we'll be out around the country just spreading the word, and hopefully people will hear the message.
Keith Boykin and Clay Kane, thanks both for being in studio with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The anthology for Colored Boys is currently available at bookstores and Amazon.com. You can also visit their website for coloredboys.com.
Still to come on the show, speaking up about gentrification in Brooklyn has never been funnier. And finally from us tonight, like it or not, gentrification is changing neighborhoods citywide. In Brooklyn, a group of Latino actors, writers, and filmmakers have teamed up to create a web series that takes a hard look at what's going on in their neighborhood.
The show is called East Willie B, and while you might expect plenty of drama, The creators of the online series have produced a very serious comedy. Judith Escalona filed this report.
You're looking at a good 600 square feet of prime real estate.
This is Bushwick. Your ad said Williamsburg.
East Williamsburg.
Yo, I'm trying to sell fly clothing, man. Not crack.
Between you and me.
Gentrification is many things to many people, but funny? It is for the creators of East Willoughby, a comedy web series set in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, a place where hipsters and corporate types are transforming the old Latino working class neighborhood. Julia Grobe is one of the creators and also acts in the series.
Yamin, my co-creator, and I, who've known each other since high school, got together. We're both living in Brooklyn. We're both Latinos, and we wanted, I think we shared a frustration with the types of Latino stories that were being told in media, and specifically film and television. And we wanted to create an alternative story that we felt like spoke more strongly to the actual current realities of urban Latinos living in New York City.
Yo, y'all need to stop talking that sports shit.
Shut up, bro.
Ain't nobody like baseball anymore, man.
A cross between Cheers and Do the Right Thing, the show takes place in a local bar where the owner and a colorful array of characters exchange barbs and warily speculate about their changing neighborhood.
Baseball's average attendance was like 28,750 something. That's in 162 games. That means that 4 million people were watching baseball.
Oh my God, Willie, you just put me to sleep.
Deben de poner el fútbol.
What?
You should put the soccer on, man.
For Yamin Siegel, co-creator and director of East Willoughby, the challenge is keeping it real throughout all the episodes.
Every character you see on television and film is going to be a stereotype of one or another, but there's a certain truth to stereotypes. And I think what we do here very successfully in this new season is really mine our characters so that, yes, perhaps they started something you've seen before, but they really expand into a character that is dynamic and will show you this next generation Latino that's grown up in the United States, that's English dominant, and that has an identity unto themselves.
The young producers have received great feedback from their audience, recently raising $50,000 online. They've also invited award-winning playwright Cándido Tirado to join their writing team. He grew up in the South Bronx and saw how that neighborhood was gentrified.
Doing a series about that and about people in the neighborhood, and it shows how important these people are and the lives they have and the complexity of lives. And of course, this is also a comedy, so you gotta have comedic elements, and I haven't seen a Latino show that has had that and not being stereotypical.
I was drinking that.
Not anymore, bro.
Flaco Navaja, a former singer in the Latin band Yerba Buena, plays the owner of the bar. He recently had a leading role in Baby Girl that screened this year at the Tribeca Film Festival.
What drew me to this project not only was the passion that they had in the endeavor, but also how organized and how legit it felt. You know, it wasn't a group of friends saying, we got this funny idea, let's do it and put it on YouTube. It was kind of like, we're gonna really do something that has never been done before.
The creative team is expanding East Willoughby's stories and deepening its characters for the new fall season, seeking to stay relevant to the show's viewers and the issues they care about while making them laugh.
You guys want to watch sports? You watch baseball, okay? Last I checked, Bushwick is still Puerto Rican.
Watch it.
Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
You whiter than milk, yo.
Half Mexican, half Cuban. Beats being full retard.
Funny.
You can view episodes of the series on the website www.eastwilloughby.com.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.